At the end of World War II, Joseph Stalin, the head of the Soviet Union, got more involved in the Pacific theater in Asia, even though it wasn't necessary, in order to strengthen his hand at the post-war negotiation table. So once again, at the end of World War II, Joseph Stalin, the head of the Soviet Union, got more involved in the Pacific theater in Asia, even though it wasn't necessary, in order to strengthen his hand at the post-war negotiation table. At the post-war negotiation table, he negotiated for half of the Korean peninsula. So Korea went from being under Japanese colonial domination to being cut in half to becoming North Korea and South Korea. Stalin put in his leader, Kim Il-sung, who was trained in the Soviet Union to rule North Korea. But Stalin did not negotiate for half of Korea to remain satisfied with only half of Korea. Instead, Kim Il-sung was put in so that he could try to take over all of Korea. So when Stalin gave the green light, Kim Il-sung ordered the North Korean soldiers to invade into South Korea. Very quickly, South Korean people and military were pushed down to the southern perimeter, the Busan perimeter in Korea. In that crowd that was pushing down to Busan included my grandparents and my uncles and my aunts in that large group of people being pushed down. But in that rush, my dad, together with one of his sisters and his aunt, were left behind in Pyeongtaek. My dad was 9 years old at that time. How could a 9-year-old take care of himself, separated from his family? He was starving, he didn't have food to eat, and so he would catch small fish in the nearby pond, and when there was a restaurant that would produce some waste, he would eat what he could from there. He was starving so badly, all his hair fell out of his head. When my grandmother realized that my father had not made the trip down, she was determined to go back and find him. At the time, civilians were not allowed to go back up north. Somehow she found a military uniform, hid her long hair inside of a military cap, and went on to military trains to go back to find her son. And she was kicked off of train after train after train, but she just kept on getting back on. And she kept on searching for him until she found him. And that is probably why my dad is alive to this day. He is in his 80s. After the Korean War, South Korea was destroyed and was the second poorest country in the world. North Korea was in better financial and economic condition than South Korea in the 1950s. It wasn't until the 1960s, under President Park, with the accelerated industrialization, that the South Korean economy started to overtake the North Korean economy. Now, the South Korean economy is 50 times bigger than the North Korean economy. The Korean economy, depending on how you measure it, is somewhere between 10th to 13th in the world after being second from the bottom. But there would be no South Korea if not for the United States. Because the United States defended South Korea in the Korean War, South Korea exists. And the American systems of democracy, of market economies, have enabled South Korea to flourish far more than North Korea. North Korea is the poorest, most corrupt, most unjust country in the world. But they have the fourth largest military in the world. The Korean War has not ended to this day. The armistice ceasefire agreement has been repeatedly violated by North Korea, and they have also verbally disavowed the armistice ceasefire agreement that ended the Korean War in terms of the full-scale fighting in 1953. They have huge stockpiles of nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. They have conducted 6 nuclear tests. They are reportedly preparing a 7th. And yet, there has been a failure to prevent North Korea from arming itself in this way and threatening South Korea, its neighbors, and the world. Appeasement as an approach to North Korea has failed miserably. During the Clinton administration, when the nuclear program of North Korea was just beginning, there was a golden opportunity to stop or destroy the North Korean nuclear program. There was a golden opportunity to do that, but instead, there was all this heavy oil that was given to North Korea, promises of light water reactors, and other things in the 1994 agreed framework that were given that gave time for the North Korean nuclear program to develop and failed to stop or destroy the North Korean nuclear program at the very beginning. When Syria, with North Korean help it is thought, built a nuclear reactor, the Israeli Air Force came and destroyed it. The Israeli Air Force destroyed it. There was consideration of doing that to North Korea's nuclear program, but they failed to do it. And then you had the appeasement coming from South Korea, from Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun, who were appeasing, sending large amounts of money to the North Korean dictator and not stopping the North Korean nuclear or weapons of mass destruction programs. On the American side, though the George W. Bush administration started out well with a strong approach to North Korea, later on, they ended up going the appeasement route by taking out North Korea from a designation as a terrorist country and removing the sanctions relating to the Banco Delta in Macau that had been imposed. And then you had President Obama, so-called strategic patience, which means basically do almost nothing in regards to North Korea. He did tell the incoming president, President Trump, that your biggest foreign policy challenge will be North Korea. You could face a war with North Korea. I've said this publicly before, but President Trump has done better than any other president in his first term, any other US president, in regards to the North Korean situation. What he did led to a moratorium, a stop, on the long-range missile tests and nuclear tests for a good portion of the first administration. The remains of US soldiers in North Korea was brought home. American citizens who were being held in North Korea were released and freed. Much of the anti-American propaganda in North Korea stopped. But North Korea still has a growing nuclear program, growing military preparedness, and the threat has only increased during the Biden administration. In 2022, North Korea tested more missiles than any other year beforehand. During this time, there was a Russian-North Korean mutual defense agreement that was agreed upon by Kim Jong-un and President Putin. It is thought that Russia has helped North Korea with things like its space program, long-range missiles, its air force, possibly hypersonic missiles as well. There are experts and analysts who believe that North Korea is steadily preparing for war. But what is so astonishing and what a lot of Americans and even some in government do not yet understand is that there is an effort to turn South Korea more like North Korea, for South Korea to open the door for North Korea to take over, and for South Korea to be taken over by the hybrid, unrestricted warfare of the Chinese Communist Party. Who would have thought there could be a communist takeover happening through South Korea, leading to a potential attempted unification under communism with North Korea? But now you have a fraudulently elected regime in South Korea that is taking many steps in that direction. He has removed all the generals and admirals, even down through colonels in the Korean military. He has destroyed counterintelligence in Korea. He is collapsing the rule of law in South Korea by trying to amend the constitution to make it a socialist country, by passing a law saying that judges can be prosecuted if they don't agree with the Lee Jae-myung administration, by prosecuting and jailing various leaders in South Korea. He is collapsing the rule of law in South Korea as well, also by collapsing the prosecution office into the Blue House. And consider that he went to the president of Vietnam and congratulated the president of Vietnam for resisting foreign forces. Which were those foreign forces? They included South Korean and US military who fought in the Vietnam War. He calls US forces in Korea a bulwark of deterrence against North Korea as occupying forces. As the US is fighting against Iran, he is sending money to Iran. Iran's missile systems and technology, a lot of that came in cooperation with and from North Korea. When a South Korean ship was attacked in the Strait of Hormuz, and US President Donald Trump said, "Hey, South Korea, don't you want to help with this?" Lee Jae-myung said, "Oh, the US is suspending its operation there. We don't have to consider that." Is he the president of the South Korean people, or is he merely a servant of North Korea and the Chinese Communist Party? Is he for the US alliance, or is he destroying the US alliance? They are pushing for a declaration, unilateral declaration of peace from the US Congress in regards to the Korean War. Why? It's because they want to get the US military. They're collapsing the alliance.
Ah,
It's an illustration.
yay.
They are trying to get US forces out of South Korea. And they are trying to seize from the United States command over the UN Central Command in South Korea as well. I believe one of the reasons that they are trying to do that is because the US still retains that. Therefore, the US has the authority to, through the UN Central Command, to come in, declare martial law, and potentially to declare DEFCON and remove Lee Jae-myung. The US has that authority, and Lee Jae-myung is scared of that and wants to remove that authority from the United States. It's important to realize as well that Americans need to realize as well that during the 2020 presidential election, there was cyber hacking that happened from Seongnam City, where Lee Jae-myung was mayor, which is within Gyeonggi province, where he was the governor. And from there was a cyber attack on the US 2020 election that deleted votes for Donald J. Trump. And according to the report by FBI Director Kash Patel, There were plane loads full of fake ballots and fake IDs that were sent from Korea to the United States to Arizona in order to tilt that key battleground state. And what is worse is in South Korea, you have the Association of World Election Bodies that has 109 member states that is sending hardware around the world that could be used for election cheating all over the world. And this AWEB, the Association of World Election Bodies, was being supported by USAID. And so when you see Trump dismantling 83% of USAID, there are good reasons for that. Prime Minister Kim of South Korea has said, North Korea is not our enemy. And America is the 14th province of South Korea. I'm sorry, Korea is about the size of one medium-sized US state. But this is who is the Prime Minister of South Korea right now. You have the head of the Democratic Party of Korea, who is part of the invasion into the US embassy, where they tried to murder the US ambassador and his wife by burning down the US embassy. He is now the head of the Democratic Party in South Korea. This is destroying the US-South Korean alliance. Under Article 3 of the Mutual Defense Treaty between the United States and South Korea, both countries are required to defend each other in the event of not only a physical military attack, but also cyber attacks. According to a penetration test of the South Korean electronic voting system by NIS, which is like the CIA of Korea, NIS conducted a penetration test of the South Korean electronic voting system and found that it failed miserably. The CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, has been hacking and interfering with US elections for quite a while now. Do you think that the CCP and North Korea would not want to hack South Korean elections? Do you think the Korean people, around 90% consider the US the most important ally, and 80-some% consider the CCP to be a threat and dislike the Chinese Communist Party? Do you really think that this same Korean people would vote in a pro-Chinese Communist Party, pro-North Korea, anti-American president and National Assembly? Last year, when I was in Korea leading the election monitoring team, I saw every form of cheating and stealing of the election. And our team wrote a report that went to the Director of National Intelligence, to the Department of Justice, and different key places in the US government and also in international society. Do you know why this has gone nowhere generally in the South Korean court system? It's because the National Election Commission of Korea hires judges to do what? To do nothing, except when the case comes before the judges, for them to rule in favor of the National Election Commission. These judges who are supposed to rule on these cases, they do not even allow investigations to move forward, much less considering the case on the merits. They do not do that. So the evidence is not even being gathered, much less being considered. And so when the National Election Commission says, oh, we won all the cases that were brought against us, that is meaningless because it is corrupt. And Lee Jae-myung is trying to destroy all the ways that he is being prosecuted in many ways. He's removed the prosecutors who are bringing the cases against him. When there is a key witness, and recently even a judge, that was potentially going to rule against him, all of a sudden, just before they're about to bring evidence or make a ruling, all of a sudden they die. It is known also that Lee Jae-myung is connected with organized crime, organized gangs. There is a criminal gangster who is at the head of South Korean government now. So not only is North Korea ruled by a criminal dictator, now South Korea's democracy is collapsing under this fraudulent, illegitimate criminal gangster president. South Korea is getting darker and darker through injustice and oppression and lies. But in the midst of this, I have hope. In the midst of all of this, I have hope. Why? Because my hope is in God. God is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, the sovereign over all the nations of this earth. And I believe that God sees the injustice, sees through the lies, is able to bring light into the darkness. And God Almighty is still able to save Korea.
Amen.
My hope is not in flesh and blood. My hope is not in people who fail all the time. My hope is in the God who never fails. God can use people. He can use the Korean-American alliance. He can use different things. But the way he chooses to do things is up to him. And I believe what is happening in the Korean Peninsula has broad implications with God's kingdom. Pyongyang was once the center of Christianity for all of Asia. Pyongyang, North Korea, was once the center of Christianity for all of Asia. It was called the Jerusalem of the East. Korea went from being a country where Christianity was illegal and did not have the gospel until the 1800s. And now, the US and South Korea are the two largest missionary sending countries in the whole world. So if, Lord willing, the Korean Peninsula is reunited, there could be a re-evangelization of North Korea. And a united Korea can be a major sending ground to finish the Great Commission. I believe this is the sort of future that God alone is able to unfold. And so I urge us to pray and to cry out to God and to see His hand moving in the Korean Peninsula. This is the last thing I will share today, but as meat is grilling on back there, I want to share that when my dad was able to grill meat at a national park here in the US for his 7 grandchildren, he said to my mom at night after that, this was the happiest day of my life. And along those lines, I believe God can bring happy, joyful, hope-filled days for us moving ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you. 고맙습니다.